the Hizmet movement gives us a whole different perspective of what Islam is really about. It's about establishing peace in God's world, salam. The movement represents Islam in a significant way in that the activities of Hizmet were, that was one of the first things in which I was engaged. My name is Floyd Schoenhals. I'm the Bishop Emeritus of the Arkansas Oklahoma Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. I retired 4 years ago. I first learned about the Hizmet movement probably 10 or, well, actually more than that, probably in around 2002. My wife, Betty, a kindergarten teacher, had a boy in her class whose father was from Turkey and mother from Uzbekistan. And they very much appreciated her teaching, and so they invited us to their home for a meal. And so we spent several times with this family, got to know them in a significant way. They felt really like family to us. And through them I met Omer Akdeniz, who introduced me to Mr. Fethullah Gulen and the Hizmet movement. At that time it was more referred to as the Gulen movement. So that's how I very fortunately was blessed to get to know about Hizmet. I very much admire and respect Mr. Fethullah Gulen. A few years ago, Foreign Policy named him the top intellectual in the world, but there's more to him than just being an intellectual. He comes across to me as a very wise person and a very humble person. In our faith tradition, and perhaps it's in the Quran as well, but one of the sayings is the fear of the Lord, or the respect, reverence, devotion to the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And that's very evident in the life of and teachings of Mr. Gulen. He's very much devoted to God, to Allah, and he's very much devoted to the love for humanity. And so that is the kind of wisdom that I appreciate. But he's also humble. He's not a person who has pursued a life of power. He's not pursued a life of personal prestige. He's not pursued a life of having many possessions. He's lived very simply. He doesn't draw attention intentionally to himself. He's more concerned about what God's people of all faith traditions are doing for the sake of the world that God created and the world that God loves, and that we all should be concerned about, including all of its inhabitants. I am also very impressed with the movement called Hizmet. These are people primarily in Turkey, but perhaps I think in other locations throughout the world, who've been very much inspired and moved by the teachings of Mr. Gulen. And so they have not really formed an organization, so to speak, but they have devoted themselves in voluntary ways to a lot of projects throughout the world for education and disaster relief, charity projects, all of which lift up humanity as a whole. And they are people, the ones that I've met have been very gracious, very humble in the same way that Mr. Gulen is. So they very much reflect his teachings in their lives and in their actions. Mr. Gulen, of course, is very, very steeped in the teachings of Islam and the Quran, and he's also I'm aware of the fact that he's also been nurtured by some of the writings of Rumi and Nursi. He not only is very well aware of what those teachings are and teaches them, but he knows how to apply them to the context of wherever he is. And he is identified, and from what I can gather, three major problems in the world. One is ignorance, one is poverty, and one is the divisions among people, whether it's divisions among like-minded people or divisions between religions and other traditions. He's very well aware of those. And so in his teachings, from my perspective, for the purpose of addressing the problem of ignorance, he has pushed and encouraged greatly the education as a way to help address the issue of ignorance. And the followers of his teachings, those who have been inspired by him, have devoted themselves, to those kind of efforts in education. In terms of the poverty, there have been he's encouraged addressing those by humanitarian efforts, whether it's in a medical perspective or after a disaster, and followers of people who have been inspired by his teachings have also devoted themselves in many sacrificial ways to address those by living in different countries, by going into situations of poverty and war themselves in order to bring either education or some kind of humanitarian relief. And for the problem of divisions or disunity that's common among humankind, he's encouraged and very much encouraged and interfaith dialogue, intercultural dialogue, and intercultural relationships. And what I've witnessed in the followers, those who are inspired by his teachings, is a strong commitment to building relationships with people of all traditions as a way to overcome that disunity. Relationships, it seems to me like, are very important, and Mr. Gulen has modeled those relationships by establishing his own relationships with people in other traditions, whether it's the ecumenical patriarch in Istanbul, whether it's the Pope or people in other faith traditions. So he's modeled that, and those who are inspired by his teachings have picked up on that and applied it in their own context. So I'm very impressed by all of that. The Hizmet movement represents Islam in a significant way, in that the participants in Hizmet are Muslims. I think for the most part, that perhaps there are others as well from other faith traditions, but they present a different kind of image, if you will, or picture of Islam to the world. Unfortunately, most of what we hear about Islam in our world today is those who are terrorists. Now, Mr. Gulen has said that a Muslim cannot be a terrorist and a terrorist cannot be a Muslim, but they seem to do those things, in the name of Islam. But the Hizmet movement gives us a whole different perspective of what Islam is really about. It's about establishing peace in God's world, salam. And that's, I think, the most significant way that it represents Islam in the world. And I only wish that there were more ways that media, especially in the United States, would tell the stories about Hizmet, so that people would see that what they see most of the time on television is not the real story of what Islam is about. So they represent Hizmet, the followers, the participants in Hizmet represent Islam in a very, very positive way, and for which I'm grateful. One of the things that impressed me and inspired me by Mr. Gulen's teachings is his emphasis on education. What I experienced when I visited some of the Hizmet schools in Turkey, some of the schools were that we would call perhaps secondary schools, and also Fethullah University, is there was strong emphasis on knowledge, gaining knowledge, but especially in the areas of mathematics and science. But there was also an emphasis on developing values, values of peace, values of coexistence, values of mutual understanding for people throughout the world. So my hunch is that when people come out of those schools, they're much better equipped to live in the world of today, where we're all connected more closely to each other than perhaps people were in the past. And but the education is not just for its own sake, whether it's for knowledge or to get values, but it's for service too. That's what impressed me about the schools that I visited, and especially primarily in Istanbul and at Fethullah University. Students that were attending these schools scored some of the highest scores in testing places and won awards. We saw awards on the plaques on the wall and those kind of things. And I understand that that's also happened in other countries as well, where Hizmet has been. I'm aware of some in Africa, I believe, Somalia perhaps, and Nigeria, where there are those kinds of recognitions have been given to the Hizmet schools. I think Hizmet's charity activities are incredibly important. There are a lot of different, agencies, church groups, Jewish groups, as well as Hizmet that does the various kinds of humanitarian work in the world. I'm not as familiar with the specifics of the humanitarian work that Hizmet is doing in the world. I'm aware, for example, that Hizmet was engaged and involved in Hurricane Katrina situation in New Orleans in 2005, I believe it was. But I've not, until just recently, I wasn't aware of the extent of its involvement in these places. That's another reason why I think that I would hope that our media outlets in the United States would lift up what Hizmet is doing in education and interfaith dialogue and relationships, and also the humanitarian work, because it makes a significant difference to people everywhere in the world. I'm aware that not everyone is pleased with the Hizmet movement. From my perspective and what I've heard and experienced is that it's primarily because it's perceived as a political threat to some people, and perhaps to some of the political leaders in various places. When you have a newspaper, for example, that's been developed by participants in Hizmet that has the largest circulation in the country of Turkey, that would cause some people perhaps to wonder, what is their agenda really? Is it simply education? Is it simply humanitarian aid, or is it simply interfaith dialogue, or is there an intercultural relationship, or there's something else behind that? Also, because the Hizmet movement has been so successful and so admired, it makes it an easy scapegoat for people who want to call attention and perhaps give false information about a movement, so they can draw attention away from the negative things that they may be doing. What I would say is one of the things that it says in the New Testament of the Christian tradition is, by their fruits you will know them. And if you look at the results of the Hizmet movement in the world, how can you not help but appreciate it and give thanks for it and hope that more people will be engaged in those kinds of efforts? So I would call into question, those who raise questions about maybe it is too good to be true, but let's be thankful for the results that are done.
I think that Fethullah Gulen, from what I have read of his works, has very interesting ideas. I particularly like his advocacy of a form of Islam that is compatible with the modern world, that is promoting peace, equality, and justice and freedom in the world.
I have found in the Hizmet movement, again, a compassion and an understanding of people's needs at a very basic level, and again, a wonderful way to share our understanding and faith, really, and respect for each human life.